Good afternoon, everyone. Let me start by welcoming all of you to today's Council on Foreign Relations Sorensen Distinguished Lecture on the United Nations. We are really honored to have the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Türk, here with us today for this year's lecture. Having served as the United States Ambassador to the United Nations from 2021 to 2025, I am so delighted to be presiding over today's discussion with both a colleague and a friend. This endowed annual lecture was established in 1996 by Gillian and Theodore C. Sorensen to highlight the United Nations and to offer a premier occasion for its most distinguished and experienced leaders to speak to the Council membership. And on a particularly special note, we are really thrilled to have former UN Undersecretary General Gillian Sorensen with us in person today, and her daughter Juliet online. So Gillian, thank you so much. You know, the last time I saw Gillian, we were in her living room with an inspiring group of young women leaders. And so to have you here with us today is really very, very special. Now allow me to introduce our speaker today, Volker Türk, who since October of 2022 has served as the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. He has devoted his long and distinguished career to advancing universal human rights, notably the international protection of some of the world's most vulnerable people. Prior to this, Volker was the Undersecretary General for Policy in the Executive Office of the United Nations Secretary General, where he coordinated global policy work. His report, Our Common Agenda, we gave you a hard time on that, I know, but we loved it. It set out a vision to tackle the world's interconnected challenges on foundations of trust, solidarity, and human rights. Volker previously served as Assistant Secretary General for Strategic Coordination in the Executive Office of the Secretary General as well. And he served as Assistant High Commissioner for Protection in the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees in Geneva from 2015 to 2019. In that position, Volker played a key role in the development of the landmark Global Compact on Refugees. And I think, Volker, that's where we first met and became friends. So please join me in welcoming my friend, my colleague, Volker Türk. So Volker, let's start out by talking about you. I did give you an extensive introduction. You've had a long and distinguished career, as you all heard. Did you ever dream that you would become the world's foremost leader on human rights? So tell us what you had in mind about what your career would be to lead you to this place.
Look, it really started when I studied law in Austria, and I was never interested in corporate law, but using the law to advance the rights of people. And it was very early because actually I volunteered for Amnesty International in Austria, in Vienna. And it was all about refugees, frankly, and asylum seekers. And of course, if you're a lawyer, they come to you because they want to see, how do you get legal advice from lawyers in order to get your case heard, to resolve some of those issues. So this became a natural thing for me to really fight for the rights of refugees and asylum seekers. And then I worked for UNHCR for a very long time. But when you work on the humanitarian front and on the protection front, you also realize that we are palliative. We respond to crises when war has erupted and conflict rages. So I did always think, how could I work more on prevention, on the human rights violations that actually lead to refugee displacement or internal displacement and forced displacement. So it was always a strong idea in my mind. How could I do more on the broader human rights front, and not only specifically for the human rights of refugees and internally displaced people? So yes, I did think about joining the Human Rights Office several times. I always came back to UNHCR, but in the end, I ended up.
And where UNHCR is, of course, is responding. But where you are and what you're describing to me today, it's about prevention. How do we deal with issues of preventing human rights leading to the kinds of crises we're dealing with today?
I mean, we often talk in the multilateral system that the multilateral system, except for the Security Council, when it wants to exercise this, doesn't have teeth. I mean, you have heard it, the Secretary General talks often about it. But I have to say that the human rights system has teeth. We may not have very sharp teeth, and they may be baby teeth, but we do have teeth. We can bite.
Babies bite?
They can bite. And I see this when we have discussions in the Human Rights Council, when states report in the treaty body organs about their state practices, when special rapporteurs issue statements and I issue statements, it has an impact. When we engage with governments and want to change laws, want to get people out of detention. Some of the people that recently in Egypt, for example, Fattah, he came out of detention. It was a long-standing, emblematic case for us to work on. And yes, it took a long time, but eventually he was released. So these things do matter. I mean, the system of human rights, as it was established, actually plays an incredibly important preventative role.
Well, we always knew no country ever wanted to be the subject of one of your reports. So that was certainly a deterrent to a certain
China is a good
extent.
example.
Yes, but they still commit human rights violations as
Yes,
well as others. So we're in a new world order. We're seeing a new world order take shape right before our eyes today. And I know this is an extraordinarily difficult moment, both geopolitically and for the wider multilateral system. Looking at a UN founded 80 years ago, what do you see as some of the challenges that the UN and its human rights work in particular have to grapple with?
I mean, obviously, the raging conflicts around the world and the extremely serious, blatant violations of international humanitarian law and international human rights law in all of them. There is no exception to it. The fact that we have Julie Bishop here, we have a very selective focus on human rights issues around the world. I mean, Myanmar, despite the fact that we do a lot of reporting on it, we hardly ever talk about it. It doesn't attract the attention that it deserves. There's no political energy that goes into it anymore, and that's problematic. So the wars and how the conduct of hostilities is done and what it means for those who want to wage war in the future, especially when you accept more and more civilian deaths, if you accept civilian infrastructure to be destroyed, has implications for all of us. Because wars will be waged differently in the future if we are not careful. And if we are not, that's a legal term, a persistent objector to any attempts to redefine the rules of war. Of course, human rights is in the middle of all of this. So it's about the erosion of the edifice. The other thing is we see more authoritarian tendencies around the world become a new fashion to restrict civic space, to adopt foreign agents laws in many different countries, to use cybercrime, which is a very important issue, but it's often authoritarian type of settings used to suppress dissent, suppress opposition. And we see a tendency where there is a reductionist approach to human rights as well. Culture wars are launched, and then the whole system is negated. I'm always stunned when we hear discussions about inequalities, about anti-racism, about gender equality, about issues of protection of women, of the LGBTIQ plus community, people with disabilities and so forth, that this becomes now a culture issue. No, it's a fundamental issue of non-discrimination and equality. And I fear that we are losing the very foundation that human rights are part of the social consensus in any society. It's not an ideology, doesn't belong to any political party. It's what societies are founded upon. And I fear for that because we cannot afford it. Otherwise, you have social cohesion fraying. We need a basic consensus. We need to conduct our business.
Now, I traveled to the border of Sudan when I was the UN ambassador. I took a group of press people, and we met with a group of young women. And I will never forget, and I use this in my speech, and I talk about it all the time, having a young woman tell me that she was hopeless and that she had lost her ambition. How do we keep hope alive for people who are in difficult circumstances? How do we keep their ambition? I remember looking at her saying, your ambition is yours, you own it. Cannot let anybody take it from you. You have to keep your ambition in the forefront of your mind. But how do we do that given what you just described for us just now?
I mean, I was in Sudan as well. It was the first country I visited when I became High Commissioner, and I visited in November 22. And I remember very well because I wanted to meet the young people and the women who were really behind the overthrow of the Bashir regime, of a military dictatorship that had lasted for 30 years. And despite the fact that Burhan and Hemeti took over again through a military coup, there were resistance committees all around the city in Khartoum, young people, women's groups, mainly, and you had, civil society activists, you had human rights defenders out there, and their spirit was indomitable, and I could feel it. So as a result, General Burhan, who was de facto president, could not crush the aim of going back to civilian rule because, half a year later, that's what was supposed to happen. And then those two men started the fight and unleashed the war. And so I do think, and I'm sure and we have a lot of contact with civil society in Sudan, that spirit is there. Of course, when you have wars, when you have guns talking, you silence it. That's you silence any civic space that is meaningful in any way. But it does show that around the world, and especially among young people, and we look very carefully at protest movements, at Bangladesh last year, Nepal now, what happened in Serbia and so forth, it actually shows that especially young people really care, and their motivating, driving force is human rights.
Well, one of the things I heard whenever I met with young people was that we could not turn our backs on them and that they are depending on you, on the Human Rights Commission, on the whole global system, on the Security Council, to stand up for their rights when they are unable to do it for themselves. And so clearly, the Human Rights Commission is a place where people look for that to happen. But I get a sense when I'm talking to young people now that they feel we're not serving their interests. We're not standing up for them. So what do you say to those young people today?
Well, I can tell you the young people who launched the protest movements in Bangladesh, they were looking to us to help them, and we did help them. We were very clear about where we stood on it. We were very clear about the denunciation of excessive use of police force, in fact, the killing of students. And then Mohammed Yunus, the chief who became the chief advisor or the de facto prime minister in the transition, asked us to send a fact-finding mission very quickly so that we could document what has been happening. And, and that was part of a very important process of reckoning. And the fact that they knew that we were watching what was happening had an effect also, I'm sure, a mitigating effect on the role of the army. Because the army, as you know, did not step in any repression. And that, shows, again, this value. In so many other conflicts, yes, we are failing. I mean, look at what's happening in the Middle East, look at what's happening in Ukraine, look at what's happening in Sudan. I mean, we are not able to trigger the political action that is necessary to stop this. So we need to be much more innovative, find different ways and means, study the political economy of conflict much better in the future so that we actually put more pressures on those who could have a difference, make a difference, not only in the conduct of hostilities, but also stopping the wars.
Now, the UN Charter, drafted 80 years ago, we're celebrating that 80th year this week, charged us with saving the world from the scourge of war. And we would pat ourselves in the back regularly saying, there's no world war. So we have saved the world from the scourge of war. But today, we know that is not true. We're following the horrifying situation in Gaza. We've talked about the situation in Sudan and Ukraine. You mentioned even Bangladesh, the situation in Myanmar, DRC. So these are clearly not world wars, but they have an impact on the world. So I think it's clear that we have to redefine what we mean when we say saving the world from the scourge of war. What situations that you're dealing with, how are you dealing with all of these various situations, these various conflicts, thousands of people dying every single month, people starving? Where do you see us going from here in dealing with the current conflicts?
There's one you didn't, well, it's not conflict per se, but it's a horrific situation very close to the US, Haiti, for example. And I want to mention it because if there were political determination to make sure that there are sanctions imposed against the ones who finance these gangs, there's a strict arms embargo implemented that actually things that the Security Council, when you were there, were decided upon. If that were implemented, you could actually stop it. Plus, you need, of course, the support to the Haitian police force. But I have to say, it's one of those situations that are outside any political attention. And it does have an impact, not only within the Caribbean, but also, I mean, for the US eventually. And you have big Haitian populations living here in the US as well, and they follow, of course, what is happening. And there is a direct context there. I do think we need to make sure that a lot of those situations get the attention that they deserve, and that we enhance not only the accountability mechanisms for it, despite the fact that the financing has really gone down massively and it has left us and my office and the mechanisms that we support in an extremely dire situation, but accountability is going to be absolutely key. And one should never, ever think that it doesn't reach the ones who have done it. I mean, look at the former president of the Philippines. Who would have thought that he would end up in The Hague? Well, he did. So the documentation, the reporting, the monitoring of our work is incredibly important. I mean, if I look at the recent decision by the European Court of Human Rights on the Ukraine-Russia case, for example, my office's reports were cited 500 times. So yes, it doesn't immediately prevent it, but hopefully it has some effect, including from the perspective of accountability.
Thank you for mentioning Haiti. I can't believe I neglected to mention that, given how much time we devoted to that when I was here in New York on the Security Council. A successful human rights framework, to me, has to have both foundational but also it has to be inspirational. And we saw that this week, um, the council put out a piece titled Trump's Boycott of the UN's Human Rights Process Puts America Last, Not First. And we were just looking at the decision that the administration just made on asylum. So in light of this, are there still glimmers of hope despite what we see as incredible backsliding? And what keeps you going? I want to know what keeps you going, but I also want to know what keeps you awake at night as well.
Well, I mean, what keeps me going is precisely the impact that we do have in a number of situations that are not necessarily in the limelight of public attention. Bangladesh is a good example. Sri Lanka, I mean, I visited the country recently, huge issues of accountability, as you can imagine after their 30-year war. There are now, with the focus of international accountability and what the new government is trying to do, there is hope that finally we would end up with an accountability mechanism that functions. So there are these things that do happen. So it's Serbia. I went to Serbia. I was the first one that the students allowed to enter the University of Belgrade and to give a lecture to hundreds of students and professors, because even the professors don't receive a salary these days, or hardly a salary, because they wanted to, have a real discussion about human rights issues. And I was surprised how many of them asked about other situations, including the one in Bangladesh. You would have thought Belgrade and what's happening in Bangladesh a year ago would not necessarily be at the forefront of their minds, but they asked about that. And that actually shows that we can make a difference if we do our work well. What keeps me awake at night is the erosion that we see, is sometimes what I think is a bit of a sleepwalking into the dismantling of an international order that has served us well. I mean, you mentioned asylum. I mean, if now the fundamental right to seek and enjoy asylum is questioned, we really go back to the pre-war years. I mean, we go back to, let's not forget, the human rights edifice emerged because after the experience of 2 world wars, the Holocaust, atrocity crimes, the Great Depression. And it came out of that experience of never again. And if we end up, and the right to seek asylum was specifically put there because how many Jewish citizens Jewish people could not, because they were deprived of nationality, could not seek asylum anymore and perished as a result, horribly. And that's why we have the right to seek asylum. And it was enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. To dismantle that system is, really gets us back to a time that we thought we had all overcome. And I'm worried about precisely that. I'm also worried about, this very strong focus on defense and military, and that this is the only response, that we don't look at national security from the perspective of soft power, anymore, or in some countries. And also that we throw out the baby with the bathwater. Yeah, we can't afford this. And yet we need human rights so much more at this very time. It's not only the moral, it's also the legal compass, and it gives hope to millions of people. They look to us and they expect us to deliver to them. We have huge financial problems. I'm losing 1/4 of my income for my office this year. And that puts us towards the survival level. And it has direct consequences. And for instance, I cannot finance the mission of inquiry for the Democratic Republic, for Eastern Congo. There's zero money for that. And that has consequences. And the victims. So yes, that makes me very worried. But I want to end on the positive note. At the same time, in this week, I have heard words of support and announcements from countries that I didn't even expect, and from philanthropists and from civil society voices that really are waking up to that reality and want to do something about it. And that's encouraging.
Thank you for that. There were a couple of things that you mentioned that I thought we should go back on. When you were in Bangladesh and people talked about what else was happening in the world. And I recall a meeting I was in at USIP a couple of years ago. The meeting was on Syria. And again, Syria is completely off the radar today. But there was a Syrian woman in the room, and she asked for a one-on-one with me for a few seconds. And I expected, I'd traveled to the Syrian border a couple of times, and I expected that she was going to talk to me about what was going on in Syria. And she came into the room and she said, I need to talk to you about what is going on in Gaza. And I was extraordinarily impressed with her because I said, your women are suffering, but yet you can focus attention on where women and children are focusing elsewhere. And I thought that was extraordinarily positive. The other issue we did not mention today is Afghanistan and the plight of the women of Afghanistan. And I'd love to hear your views on both those issues.
Well, there's actually currently a discussion going on within the Human Rights Council to establish a mechanism of accountability for Afghanistan. I mean, we will see. I hope, again, the question is going to be the financing of it. The issue is indeed of what type of pressure, leverage do you use in order to influence absolutely horrific gender apartheid system that they have established. And I mean, I have an office on the ground. They try to do whatever they can. You know, there are pockets within Afghanistan where you have some women who are able to get on with their lives, but that's not the vast majority of the country. And it is absolutely critical that indeed we not only document it, but we are also trying to put more pressure and find an accountability for this massive against women and girls in particular, but also against men, especially those who oppose the Taliban and who end up in prison or executed.
I'm going to ask one last question before I turn it over to the floor. So it's kind of back to you. So you're concluding your third year as UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. And I'd love to hear from you some reflections on the role. What has been, I think we've heard from you what has been really hard. What has been really enriching for you? And finally, do you have any advice to those who will someday lead the United Nations and its various agencies, perhaps to the new Secretary General, whoever she might be?
Yes. Well, I think for any advice for the future Secretary General, I think it will be very important for her to make sure that we are not only paying lip service to human rights, including within the human rights system, but we actually make it work and ensure that it is part and parcel of the peace and security side, of the development side, of the humanitarian side. And I mean, with the UN80 report that has just come out, creation of a human rights coordination group, that's a good beginning. But what I often see in and outside the UN, there's a lot of lip service. We need to fix the financing issue. We need to fix the political support issue. We need to fix the fact, yes, that the human rights front will always be the uncomfortable one. We'll always have the difficult conversations. And that's part of our job. And it's always with the purpose of doing better. What I'm worried about and what I have seen over the last couple of years in societies, and I think it has a direct bearing on human rights, is the polarization within countries, within the international community, visions and what I would call a very binary thinking. You know, us versus them, complexities get lost. We see either you're for me or against me. And that is not the thinking of the future, because we need to have robust discussions. We have to have fierce disagreements. We need to find ways, and in a respectful way, to find the best possible solution and be creative about it. But people don't even listen to each other anymore. And that's very dangerous.
But how do we get them to listen to each other? What are the forums? I mean, there's been this whole discussion around whether the United Nations, and again, like so many people my generation, I believe strongly in the United Nations. And I always quote Madeleine Albright, who said, if we didn't have it, we'd create it today. That's a bit of a misphrasing, but basically we need the United Nations. What do you say to people who say the United Nations is not relevant to dealing with the issues that we are facing today?
Well, we definitely need to do a much better job at communicating, but there are many things that are working. And for instance, humanitarian aid and assistance is being delivered. Yes, we don't have enough funding, but it is still being done. We have a human rights system that, as I mentioned, has some teeth. I'm absolutely convinced that the political repression that we saw in Venezuela a couple of years ago, which is still there, don't get me wrong, but it has not been done in the way that it was done a couple of years ago because of the international attention that the world put on it. So that, I mean, yes, can we prove it? Can you do it scientifically and technically? Can you really show? Probably not. But we see it in so many situations that because you have a system that is there to work for this type of things, you have an effect that, well, not only responds to victims, but also, you know, stops repression and mitigates some of the worst effects. I mean, if you look at the many conflicts around the world, this requires a not only a co-ownership, it requires the leadership and the ownership of the member states. And I sometimes feel when I listen to leaders, when they speak at the UN, as if the UN was something else and they didn't belong to it. And that's a problem, because they own it. It's the member states that own it. And you would have to reinvent the UN if you didn't have it, because you would not have the convening spaces. You would not have the possibilities to at least look for the solutions when they can come. You will need the channels of communication open to everyone in order to find a solution. But if you close all of this, actually the world would be even a more dangerous place than it is already.
Thank you. So at this time, I would like to invite members to join us in a conversation with their questions. Wow. Don't even know where to start. A reminder that this meeting is on the record. And what I will do is start with a couple questions from the audience, but we also have a virtual audience as well. So I'll take a couple questions from the audience, and then I'll take a virtual question. And if we have time, I'll come back to the audience again. Yes.
Jean-Marc again, I used to be the head of peacekeeping at the United Nations. Today, the UN seems to have very few real friends. The United States sometimes seems to be actively working against its creation. The Europeans remain friends of the UN, but they are very inward-looking because of the priority of repelling the Russian aggression in Ukraine. China is ambiguous because on the one hand, it likes a world of norms that creates a measure of predictability, but I will not claim in front of the High Commissioner for Human Rights that it is the model of human rights. At the same time, it has a certain sense of accountability to its people in some ways. And so my question is, in this configuration, what kind of alliance of friends can you build? And in particular, how do you see China in that picture?
Want to take a couple?
Yes.
And then I'm going to go to the back of the room. Back of the room is always ignored. Can I describe you as the man with the white hair in the back of the room? No, that's you, sir. Right here. The distinguished man with a white hair in the back of the room.
Thank you very much. Both of you bring incredible knowledge of the working of the United Nations, both from the inside and outside of working inside. The big question now, the 80th anniversary of the United Nations, is reform. Not only because of the financial circumstance of the United Nations, but because of lots of other challenges. And some say that the job of the United Nations is maintaining peace and security, forget about all the other things that are doing. But without action on other things, the peace and security that is really threatened. So the question is, what do you see happen moving forward? Is this really a reform exercise that is going to deliver? Or, like many of the things that we talked about in the past, is move forward to the next Secretary General? Thank you. My name is Ramakrishna. I'm from the Woods Oceanographic.
Well, thank you, Rama. Why don't we take those two, and then Liz, you can open it up for a couple questions from the virtual audience.
No, I think the alliance issue is absolutely key. And we have been trying very hard to work out a bit variable geometry. How do you build up voices from different quarters? And it's not only member states, it will have to be civil society, who are also, I'm afraid, affected by some of the funding cuts, and heavily affected, especially grassroots movements. But also philanthropy, private sector, and so forth. So we really need to build that alliance, and we are trying to build it as we speak. What I find interesting is at the last Human Rights Council, a high-level segment, we have never had so many high-level dignitaries show up, including from countries that you would normally wonder, why do they want to engage with us at the council? And I have had a lot of conversations, especially with ambassadors, but also now with a lot of foreign ministers and delegations here, that they are worried about the erosion. They're worried that the system could actually be weakened, and they're waking up to it. And so I do think, and including from different countries in Asia, Africa, in Latin America. And we need them to make sure that their voice becomes louder, clearer, and that they also, counter what I think is it's not only the funding, it's also by the way, the sanctions against the International Criminal Court are appalling. They are totally unacceptable because it actually undermines a fundamental piece of the international system. I didn't hear member states strong enough on this, but I do think this is changing as we speak. And by the way, it's not only the US, it's also the Russian Federation, because the Russian Federation has issued arrest warrants against judges. The US, as you know, issued sanctions against judges and prosecutors. And I really think that's extremely dangerous, and there needs to be very strong reaction from member states to that. On China, well, China, at least in its own configuration, and we just saw a number of initiatives, does want the multilateral system to work. But as the others, they all want to work it according to their own vision. And that's why the law comes back. And the charter comes back, and it's also a response to the colleague. The charter doesn't talk only about peace and security. It talks about human rights. And when I hear discussions about when you talk about things in country, and this is domestic interference and it's national sovereignty, well, actually, if you read the charter carefully, this is gone out of the winds, because this is not the argument at all. The charter makes it absolutely clear that human rights human rights are a matter of international concern, and it's not an interference in domestic affairs. And that's the type of discussion, especially when it comes to China and some of the countries around it, Russia, very similar. They emphasize the sovereignty argument as if you couldn't say anything or do anything about what's happening in these countries. Well, no. human rights are a matter of international concern. I mean, the Myanmar discussion in the Council is often very absurd because China, Russia, others will always say, well, this is not a matter of any concern to anyone. Well, you have 1 million refugees in Bangladesh. You have rampant trafficking going on. You have massive violations inside the country. Of course, it's a matter. And we must never lose the arguments. And the law helps us. The Charter helps us. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights and all the subsequent instruments, they help us counter these arguments.
Okay. Thank you. We will take one question from our virtual audience at this point.
We'll take the next question from Farha Tahir. Farha, please unmute your mic. It looks like we're having some trouble with that line. We'll take the next question from Trooper Sanders.
Hi, this is Trooper Sanders. So I want to ask how you think about human rights and artificial intelligence, both what we see today with our ChatGPT and large language models, but in particular, when or if we reach the state of what's called artificial general intelligence, and where AI may be able to exceed human capabilities, which could include human capabilities to abuse human rights. Thank you.
Why don't you respond to that one? We'll take
And then
another
we
one
take.
from the
So
audience.
obviously that's one of our big issues on the whole digital side, and in particular generative AI and human rights. We have done a taxonomy of risks when it comes from the human rights perspective and generative AI in particular. And you know, we always talk about what AI is going to give us and what's going to do the world. So that's, I'm sure we will be seeing a lot of very good progress on health, education, and so forth. But all of this does require a very clear risk analysis. And there is this myth, including some legal theories say, well, no, human rights doesn't apply online, it doesn't apply to the digital world, and this is, of course, total nonsense. But it's because, of course, human rights apply online, offline, wherever you are. It's not a question of, doesn't make that distinction, because it affects daily lives of people, and it affects, and as we know, AI systems often perpetuate prejudice, biases that we have in society. We know, for example, that some instances, especially when you use it for facial recognition issues and surveillance, that it very often leads precisely to the type of violations that we see offline. And that's a particular risk. I often find it quite striking that when it comes to pharmaceutical industry, for example, where you have to go through rigorous processing, rigorous tests, that you don't have the same on the digital side when products are put out on the market. And to analyze the risk of putting out this type of tools without proper risk testing, which brings us to regulation, because of course, from a human rights perspective, you do need regulation. And it cannot just be because of the human, not only because of the human rights, but primarily because of the human rights. And I went to the Silicon Valley last year. I met all of the big companies also to discuss their own risk framework, which they say they have, but then each one has a different one, and it doesn't necessarily take the full range of human rights into account, including where these products land. Again, Myanmar is a good example. It's not artificial intelligence, but it was Facebook, as you know, was the medium where the hatred and the incitement to violence was spread. Without the proper safeguards in place, stop it. So yes, it's a big issue for us.
You know, if I can follow up on that a bit, you know that last year we were able to pass an AI resolution in the General Assembly with 120 co-sponsors, including China. But what was interesting to me is that many of the co-sponsors were countries from the Global South. And part of the reason for putting that resolution forward was to put some kind of guardrails around how AI is being used, and that it be used for good, and that it be made available for the entire world, even those countries where the technology and the capacity is not there. How do you see us using AI as a positive tool? For example, when you're doing investigations to places where you have no access.
And we are using it. I've created an innovation hub on the data side, and we are using, I mean, frankly, not least because of the financial difficulties, we have to use AI even more, and we have a whole program on that. So that's clear. But it is also clear that some of these tools, the same human rights defender out there that uses it to document abuses, is then often silenced immediately, and the surveillance kicks in that prevents her from doing that. And that's, so we have these two, we have these two sides, which is why you need, and I remember the GA resolution that you mentioned. Of course, from our perspective, we wish there was a stronger emphasis on human rights, there so much. But then
it was there at the start.
I'm sure.
I will tell you that. We drafted it, but
it was,
yeah.
It was part of the negotiation process.
Yeah.
But we did have the Pact for the Future and the Global Digital Compact that had a stronger human rights reference, and that is important.
Yeah. Thank you. Saw your hand. Good. I won't describe you. I'll just say.
Thank you for your reticence. I'm Ken Roth, currently from Princeton and the past from Human Rights Watch. I want to ask you about the Uyghurs. And as you know very well, at the height of China's persecution, 1 million Uyghurs out of a population of 11 million was detained, by far the largest percentage in the world. Today, there's been some diminution, many of them just put into forced labor. Your predecessor, Michelle Bachelet, put out a very strong report finding possible crimes against humanity. In your 3 years, you've never once condemned China's treatment of the Uyghurs. You have never reiterated in your own voice the findings of your predecessor. You just say you stand by your office's findings. You say you're engaging with China. But would you today, on the record, condemn, deplore, criticize, whatever you choose, China's treatment of the Uyghurs? And would you reiterate in your voice her finding of possible crimes against humanity?
Can I take one question from the back of the room? I see a lady back there with a kind of purplish, yeah.
Hi, Ambassador. It's wonderful to see you. My question is for you. What role do local and regional governments play in promoting human rights as we see certain national governments stepping away? As someone who's in local government, we know that it is important for our voices to be heard. So I'd love to hear your perspective on that. Thank you.
Take those two, and then we'll see if we can
Look,
take
there's no
one or
crack
two
of
more.
Oh, sorry.
No,
there's
go ahead and take
crack
those two.
of light between me and the report, and I've always made that very clear publicly. I don't know how many times. Yes, the report was issued. The council did not decide on it. As you know, it was defeated in the council. So yes, my strategy is to talk to them again and again and again, not only about the issues in Xinjiang, by the way, also in other parts of China, Hong Kong, Tibet, civic space, and to find ways and means to engage. We have very robust discussions with the Chinese authorities at all levels. Whether it will lead to the changes that we all hope for, progress is extremely slow, and yes, I'm frustrated by that enormously. So we are, as much as we can, following up on this. We don't have the financing that we have, that we would need to do more about this, to be very honest. But yes, it's part of the DNA of our work, and we will continue doing it. And you have, if you look at all the public statements that I've made, I've been very clear about this. And I have no crack of light between me and the report. On local and regional governance, we actually have just issued guidance on the creation of human rights cities, because we think precisely that, and it's not just cities, it's also local governance structures, so that they adopt the human rights-based approach when it comes to housing issues, when it comes to refugee and migration issues, when it comes to issues of even basic services. And we believe very much that very often at the local level, you have bastions of freedoms that you don't necessarily see at the national level or at the regional level. So yes, extremely important. We've just issued guidance on that.
Okay, her name starts with a J. That's all I can see.
Hi, Janine DiGiovanni, The Reckoning Project. You spoke with great empathy about Bangladesh and Afghanistan, Sudan, but you glossed over Gaza. And given today's statement by Netanyahu, as well as the mounting catastrophic situation there, and the UN's report last week, given genocidal intent, could you elaborate on that, please? Thank you.
Okay.
Oh,
so
so you're going
I
to
was
give
going to
more.
let you answer. I haven't looked at this side of the room. The gentleman with the white sleeve. That's you. I'll go to the middle of the room after this.
Thank you both for lovely conversation. My name is Galwak Ramdeet. Last week, your office came out with a report on South Sudan, and you said that systemic elite corruption is driving South Sudanese human rights crisis. What is your message to governments and business leaders, and even, as Ambassador Thomas-Greenfield put it, South Sudanese who are losing hope that, they can't do anything about their rights being violated, and the international community isn't doing anything? Thank you.
Look, on Gaza, if you look at all the statements I've made over the last couple of years, last 2 years in particular, and I thought that also the idea is that we talk about other crises because I speak about Gaza almost every week. We just issued today also on the West Bank the so-called database about business interests. It's absolutely horrific, war crime upon war crime, crime against humanity upon crime against humanity. I mean, the solution is clear. We need a ceasefire. We need the release of all hostages. We need a path for peace. And we have seen a lot of developments this week at the UN, which I hope will finally make it clear that it is in the interest of Israelis and Palestinians to find a way out of what is an absolutely intolerable situation. And yeah, I mean, we continue documenting what we can and reporting to the world about what is happening. It's because we discuss other situations. It's not because of oblivion. It's because we are very much on record when it comes to that situation. On South Sudan, I mean, we issued again press release after press release. It doesn't get the international attention that it needs because it should trigger, hopefully, some action on those who have any influence over the current government. And it's going absolutely in the wrong direction as we speak. And I think the business interests, again, I think are important to look at because some people obviously benefit from this chaos.
Do we have anybody else virtual? Right? The lady in the blue dress. No, you're right behind the camera. I guess
Miriam Safi, CFR Life member, and until July 11th, I was a very proud Foreign Service officer, but now have been purged alongside 1,300 colleagues, including Maureen sitting next to me.
Thank you for your service. And
appreciate it. My question, it feels like a very scorched earth moment. I'm sort of emerging from the dust of it myself. And one thing, and it's an awkward question for me to ask as someone who spent almost 2 decades inside government as a career diplomat, as a US diplomat, is there a silver lining to the leadership vacuum of the U.S. in this moment? Asata mentioned the subnational diplomacy piece, like the cities for human rights. Are there seeds to a new multilateral human rights order that could emerge that, and a day after, borrowing the concept of hope, that maybe we'll see something different emerge in the future that could be a potential positive? And hopefully one day we will be back on stage in terms of our leadership in the space.
Thank you for that question, and that wasn't planted. I didn't know you were a foreign services officer, but I'm very happy you asked that question because I had one last question as we're running out of time, and I'll add that question to her question. I think it would be useful for this audience to hear how we can be helpful to you as advocates, as supporters, as members of the council. Is there something that we can do for you that will help you do your job even better? So with that, I turn it over to you.
No, I mean, I think one area that I'm worried about is that, and I think Jean-Marie Guénot mentioned it, it's not just the US, the absence of the US, it's also lack of leadership elsewhere. And I mean, Europe is very much as you said, I fully agree with you, it's very much self-absorbed. And that's a problem because, you know, of course, Ukraine also very dramatic. I mean, but we need leadership that regains this global, you know, when we are moving to this very bizarre world where we don't yet know how the rules are going to pan out, we do need, in particular from civil society, from societies, that they actually speak up very clearly about some of the fundamental principles and values upon which this order was founded. If we don't have that, and we cannot afford double standards or selectivity when it comes to this. I mean, that's also part of the problem because there is different attention paid to different things. And, you know, that's normal. We, as my office, cannot afford this because that's why we issue on on all these different crises, constantly something. We need to find a way to connect much more with social movements, to use the law to its fullest. I mean, litigation is going to be an absolutely important, to make sure that facts are presented and that they are not denied. Take lying wrong again be a good way of, in this nihilistic post-truth world is not serving anyone. And that we are also able to move away from crisis and focus on the longer term issues because, you know, we are in this governance that is so short term that forgets the big issues of our times that we hardly ever talk about anymore. Climate change, in fact, sometimes denied, but clearly is one of the big issues of our times. And we are not putting the political energy behind it that is actually necessary. Although, if I look at the private sector moves on irrespective. And that's actually a little bit the hope that I also have, that with the mobilization of private sector, because the private sector has an interest in a stable environment. They don't, I mean, except for some, but mostly they have an interest in a stable environment. And that's the best guarantee for us to bring society together and to build alliances and to act in solidarity with each other, because there is a lot, the divide and rule comes in. I mean, the divide and rule will be played out in these times enormously and really awful. I mean, we need coalitions of all those who care about fundamentally what moves us in this, and see what happens. And I think we are at the beginning of finding out how we can do that. Sorry, then I forgot what. Was that all, or you asked me something?
Well, I asked what we can do to help you.
Oh, what you can do to help. I mean,
think you've described
first of
some
all,
of that.
your support would be very important, including in terms of studies that you do, precisely to, you know, think about governance, of what governance actually means for us, and how to bring in the social movement side. And yes, we need your political, strategic, whatever financial support you can provide. We will need that as we go forward. Thank you.
Well, let me thank all of you for joining today's session. And I want to give a special thanks to the High Commissioner and to the Sorensen family for supporting this really extraordinary discussion. And again, thank all of you today for making this such a rich discussion. You can find the video and the transcript of this lecture on CFR's website. Thank you.
Great.